All there you had the idea for Palantir?
Yeah, well, post 9/11, I think the idea, again, it was Silicon Valley ought to be involved in fighting terrorism and protecting our civil liberties.
Not yet. It's not over yet.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
The New World Order really is a tool for addressing a new world of possibilities.
The fictional Patriots, as we understand them, seem to be a combination of corporations and shadow entities, and some think they're related to a company called Palantir.
South China Sea is heating
Vladimir
up.
Putin tells the U.S.
A North Korean nuclear attack could be
Tensions
imminent.
between the U.S. and Iran are at
near Taiwan as tensions escalate.
Now that the focus is shifting to great power competition, the real question is, can we deter the next Great War?
Using MGS2 specifically as a lens because, as we understand, Kojima basically wrote their business model 20 years early. Not by trying to look through the crystal ball itself ironically, but basically an understanding of events that led to the digital society that conceived Palantir, which was in 2003 after the disastrous effects of 9/11 and counter-terrorism operations. At the helm of these operations was companies like Palantir, or rather by proxy for the software used by the hegemonic United States that involves the military-industrial complex, including intelligence agencies like the CIA, to effectively look into a crystal ball of every activity it deems necessary, including yours. MGS2 was released in November 2001, and Palantir was founded in 2003. And looking at the post-Cold War shift towards information warfare was the dominant military doctrine.
Once the Cold War is over, our enemies won't be so clearly defined. Using humans alone won't be enough. An electronic network will span the globe, and our enemies will blend right into it.
By sharing information that governments want to sweep under the rug, they gain leniency for their agencies. They're trying to create some kind of human network without borders.
DARPA's Total Information Awareness Program, which was already being discussed and would launch publicly in 2002. Kojima, naturally born in huge time periods, through the decades absorbed all of the research that was necessary that he came to a conclusion of ideas that he was so obsessed about. As we understand, the rise of the digital age in the MGS series was first conceived in Peace Walker.
The idea to have an AI act for zero came about in '74, when the data from the mammal pod penetrated NORAD. Clearly an AI couldn't be allowed to make its own decisions. So they would take away its ability to act, and instead create a specialized system in which the AI, bound by specific rules, filters the massive amounts of data it collects before passing it on to people, subtly guiding their decision-making. A system of the people, by the people, for the people. So they began researching how to do it, and they've got a name for Anderson's AI project. It's called the Patriots. It's all about ensuring that the concepts driving society appears the same in the mind of each person in that society, about maintaining the identity of the individual, and yet having that individual willingly make up part of the whole.
Set in the 1970s, where artificial programmed autonomous machines were deployed in Costa Rica, capable of functioning without human input, and this era was the basis of everything the Patriots would later become. They had already succeeded in genetics, but now they found a way to digitize life itself.
Mapping of the human genome was completed early this century. As a result, the evolutionary log of the human race lay open to us.
We started with genetic engineering, and in the end, we succeeded in digitizing life itself.
And in doing so, found a way to control it in every aspect. Military corporations, infrastructure surveillance, and public interests. All of it run through an artificial machine incapable of emotion, just purely logically driven, designed to hack the human autonomy and decision-making at the very root. The idea for an AI to stand in for zero was formulated by minds like Dr. Strangelove and SIGINT, and that name, of course, is not just an accident. SIGINT as a pseudonym, but here is also a direct reference to the key operating principles of real-world intelligence gathering that Palantir they themselves actually use, with free components such as COMINT, which is communications intelligence intercepting voice, text and image communications between people, and ELINT, electronic intelligence intercepting non-communication signals, radar systems and tracking data and identification frequencies. FISINT, which is foreign instrumentation signals intelligence, analysing technical data from weapon test, telemetry from missiles, drone flight patterns, and everything military hardware generates just by operation.
What does SIGINT mean, anyway?
It's short for Signal Intelligence.
Signal Intelligence?
The part of intelligence that deals with electronic information. Things like intercepting and analyzing electronic communications, determining enemy force strength and positioning from radar emissions and radio chatter. You get the idea. Code breaking is considered part of SIGINT as well. 40 years from now, we'll be in the age of electronic warfare. It won't be long before information replaces firepower as the most valuable commodity on the battlefield.
So you're saying they won't need guys like me anymore?
Sorry to break it to you, but that's not gonna happen. No matter how advanced our technology gets, there's still no substitute for human beings. Anyway, the Major is a man of foresight. He knew the electronic age was coming, and so he called out to me.
And you responded?
Well, I didn't have any place else to go.
You couldn't find a job?
Nope. None of the places where they do this kind of high-tech research would even let me in the door.
These tools, as we understand, is what grows the Patriot's powers over the course of the series that ultimately led to MGS4. Zero, considered the main antagonist of the series, effectively gathered all these different means of intelligence to ultimately place the planet in his hands. As we understand, together, these form a tool that's capable of monitoring every form of information in real time. It's these systems, as we understand with SIGINT, that are the key operating principles that both the Patriots and Palantir run on, inside the military and inside public institutions, and of course tied to corporate interests rather than we ourselves. And this is a very big insight into exactly really why the Patriots are not too far-fetched.
Yep. The country, the war economy, it ain't run by people. It's run by the system. No need for high-level decision-making authority. It's all handled by a massive, yet simple information processing system. An AI. It works just like natural law. The world's a much simpler place than most folks realize.
We understand how the Patriots work, but to really understand how Palantir connects with the Patriots is to understand how they operate. In its typical operational workflow, Palantir pulls directly from data from multiple sources, simultaneously with financial transactions and social networks and satellite imagery, including biometric databases. It then connects all of these entities, people, vehicles, bank accounts, phone numbers, location data, the same way SOP connected soldiers under the Sons of the Patriots system. From there it builds network graphs of relationships patterned by algorithms designed to identify networks it deems undesirable. On top of that, it sits prediction and modelling tools, and users can simulate these scenarios and project likely patterns and logistics both inside and outside the battlefield. It essentially acts like the S3 plan for its subjects, a simulation capable of producing feedback and results, formulating outcomes before they even happen, perhaps very similar to a VR training kernel.
I feel like I know this terrain. Wasn't it in the VR training?
Nikita weapon mode, level 4. Do you recognize it?
Oh, so that was another rehearsal for this mission.
No, a simulation. Not the same thing as a rehearsal.
In MGS2, the Patriots use this logic to collectively control the public through controlled presentation of artificial data. Palantir converts raw data into operational decisions in the same way, with one critical difference. Palantir does not autonomously make decisions. It sources as a tool to manage and filter information and produce rapid results. Unlike the Patriot's AI, which started with no will of its own and ended up fully guiding human decision-making until any human input became irrelevant, Palantir sits just short of that line, thankfully. Because everything retro-future dystopian fiction has warned about, and everything literature like 1984 portrayed in a fully surveilled society controlled from the top down, has only moved closer.
It's being used by the US military, by state armies in allied countries, by PMCs. Even police agencies are starting to adopt it.
The deeper issue here is epistemological. Power increasingly comes from control over how information structures. Whoever controls the systems that model the future begins to shape not just how institutions act, but how governments perceive reality itself, just as Zero's shadow hand influenced governments around the world. While Palantir doesn't rule like an AI overlord, it decides reality for the institutions using it. And this is not unlike the logic behind Metal Gear Solid 2, where the AI controls the flow of information, and you control what society believes is real, is the sense of the idea, when AI is in fact one of the main contributors to decision making.
That's what history is, Jack.
But in the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness, never fading, always accessible.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander.
All this junk data, preserved in an unfiltered state, growing at an alarming rate.
Palantir represents a step towards algorithmic governments rather than machines ruling humanity outright. But what it does show us, just like MGS, is machines mediating every important decisions humans make. And locked in with Palantir's deep influence on the new war economy, this resembles Zero's motivations, or rather the deviated will of the AI itself. A cleaner, safer battlefield, ideally war-dependent, but on information systems that map entire social networks, all integrated. Satellite imagery and signals intelligence, and battlefield sensors and logistic data into an operational picture, such as identifying targets and tracking movements, predicting outcomes, and simulating possible futures. What this essentially means is it frames reality for decision makers, not for you or me. These tools that are used against us, we can't use against them. Palantir doesn't manufacture weapons because it doesn't need to. It sells the infrastructure that makes modern warfare function, the intelligence picture and the target identification for the logistics network, and the operational data that tells the military what to do and when to do it. And because of that, it's a new kind of business model that doesn't require any form of peace. In fact, it requires the opposite. Nearly every conflict and every new threat and every government that decides it needs better intelligence capability is another contract. And uncertainty scales, and of course instability grows the market. MGS4 understood this before most people were willing to say it. The war economy in that game isn't kept running by any single nation or ideology. It's kept running by the infrastructure surrounding war, the PMCs and the supply chains, and the new commodity that has now become war as a business. The Patriot's AI, like Palantir, with the invisible hand gatekeeping it all. No single actor needed to want war. The system simply functions better when war continues, and the same goes for the profit margin at Palantir. You could say Palantir sits in exactly the position that it doesn't start conflicts, but it just becomes more valuable every time one does begin. And because it's embedded so deeply into the decision-making infrastructure of governments and militaries, the institutions depending on it have a structural interest in maintaining the kind of world that justifies its existence.
This age chose to act through economics instead of nation-states. Powered by the industrial and digital revolutions that came before it, this age gave birth to a twisted economic revolution. A battlefield revolution. It created a new world without substance. In this new world, there were no ideologies, no principles, no ideals.
This is why it becomes problematic in the wrong hands. These tools inherit algorithmic biases and assumptions embedded in their data, not different from the Patriots, which is just programmed. Predictive systems trained on historical data reproduce existing social patterns or norms. Past events become the blueprint for future decisions, regardless of whenever the blueprint was ever just. All of this because what I'd like to call the GW problem. These systems operate as proprietary software. The public cannot see how decisions are generated, nor even find out, and if they did, I'm sure they'd be blacklisted. Everything about Palantir, like the Patriots, is kept in secrecy. Ironically, the name itself comes from Lord of the Rings, the indestructible seeing stones used primarily by the kings of Gondor and Anor for the secure communication and surveillance. Clearly dangerous to use because they could be manipulated, by example, from characters like Sauron to deceive or corrupt whoever looked into them. It's a case of power in the hands of authority deciding the will of others yet again, for good intent or for malicious. Palantir does not autonomously govern society, but the total data integration of every aspect of human livelihood, combined with predictive governance and government starting to rely on those predictions to make policy. The system beginning to think for institutions makes everything feel soulless, rehashed, a reiteration of things that have already happened, and perhaps why everything in every entertainment industry almost feels the same. In the context of everything between the two, Palantir fits alongside MGS because the Patriot's AI didn't need to rule directly. It only needed to shape the environment where humans made choices through filtered information systems, giving people the illusion of freedom of choice when so many of those choices had already been selected for them to pick from.
That's why we must depend on information control. People need an appropriate context for their lives.
What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Companies like Palantir were built around the belief that if vast streams of information could be unified, such as financial data, travel records and phone metadata, surveillance feeds, then hidden networks might reveal themselves before catastrophic events unfold. The idea is simple. If intelligence systems had been able to connect the dots earlier, perhaps something like the 9/11 event could have been disrupted before it even happened. Such events birthed Palantir and those systems to begin with, or so we're told. From what I've gathered on the document of Metal Gear Solid 2, the World Trade Center was just missed. Of course, a lot of these ideas were essentially cut after September 11th, a visual coincidence that fans have discussed for decades. Both the fictional Patriot system and the real-world platforms like Palantir emerge, I think, from the same fundamental idea of modern civilization that generates more information than human institutions can possibly process. And when intelligence fails to occur, the instinctive response is to build systems capable of foresight and filter out all the useless information. Metal Gear Solid 2's answer was to question where that logic ultimately leads. If preventing catastrophe requires monitoring the entire flow of information, then the infrastructure designed to protect society begins to resemble the infrastructure required to control it. The line between security and security built to guarantee it is precisely what the game was exploring long before the world began building technologies that look uncomfortably similar. In many related formats, but yet not a part of the context of this video on Palantir, is a social credit system, which Palantir doesn't assign citizens to a universal score or directly lock people out of jobs and travel through a visible centralized mechanism. But it is a system that interprets information and decides which patterns matter. When those systems carry biases, or when the institutions using them already have motives, the gap between identifying a threat and manufacturing one becomes uncertain very quickly, and possible to implement these systems with Palantir's software. Characters, for example, like Solid Snake, spend much of a series labelled as a terrorist. from the perspective of the system controlling this information and softwares. The Patriots deem Snake as an undesirable element disrupting the structure they've built. Through surveillance networks and controlled media, the Patriots frame him as a threat to the public, when in reality, he is a threat to their interests. To anyone reading the headlines, Snake is considered a villain, just like many others in the real world. But the reality inside the story is the opposite, for some actions are aimed at exposing corruption within the military-industrial system itself. Yet these very systems can be used to weaponize against authentic and genuine people. The label of terrorist exists because the institutions controlling the flow of information have the power to define what it is. Once a narrative is established, the individual caught inside it becomes whatever the system says they are. Systems like Palantir aren't the Patriots in the conventional sense, but when you consider their affiliations, the intelligence agencies and the defense contractors, the private capital and big tech interests that have joined hands with governments behind closed doors, it becomes very easy to conclude that perhaps our futures have been bought, paid for, and sold to the highest bidders. The world has become widely dependent on AI and these systems, machines influencing decision making without most people even being aware of it. And the question is, who decides whenever the machine is right?
I'll decide for myself what to believe and what to pass on.
But is that even your own idea?
Because the Patriots AI didn't need to rule directly, it only needed to shape the environment where humans made choices, through filtered information, through controlled presentation of reality, giving people the illusion of free choice when so many of those choices were selected for them to decide from. Palantir doesn't autonomously govern the society where the Patriots ultimately did. But what this does show us that MGS always understood is the deeper danger that was never the machine becoming the consciousness, but the danger was the machine becoming necessary, governments relying on its predictions to make policy, and the system beginning to think for institutions. Everything following starting to feel like a reiteration, because the system is almost comfortable recommending more of the same. And the most frightening thought of all of this unfolding is that most people are blissfully unaware that machines actually have a lot more influence on human behaviour. Well, that's all for today's video. I hope this gave you something to think about, and if there's something interesting you want to let me know about Palantir and the Patriot connection, please leave it down below in the comment section. I'd love to hear it. That's all for today, and I'll see you in the next one.